Hi. Wow, thank you all for coming immediately after lunch, fighting through your food comas. I know you're here to see Sujata because she is so magnetic that you couldn't stay away despite all those food offerings in Tucson. I am Juliet Grames. I am extremely privileged to be Sujata's editor at Soho Press. I've had the privilege of working on 4 books with her. And here's the problem. It is very tempting to want to sit here and make a speech about Sujata.
No.
I know you're here to hear her talk, so I will try to keep my notes brief, but they gave me a mic, so they can't stop me. And I just want to say that what we love so much about Sujata's writing comes directly from her as a person. They always say that you're supposed to divorce an author's oeuvre from their biography, right? You're not supposed to look at a book an author read and say, is that drawn from life? And I will say about Sujata, here's the thing. We love her characters and the execution of her stories for their curiosity, their incredible curiosity, their incredible compassion. She writes the most heartwarming and just realistic, tender characters that you just want to relate to. We love the way that they're all such a class act. Have you ever seen such a class act as this author? And it just
Well, about an hour earlier with Glenn, we saw that.
and I will say the advocacy that we see all of her characters exhibit is something that Sujata bears out in her day-to-day life, even outside of the writing sphere. And finally, I will say that Sujata's characters are indefatigable. They will never give up in pursuit of justice, in pursuit of crime fighting, whatever it is. And I have never worked with an author who is more indefatigable about their research, their attention to detail, their desire to get it right and to serve their readers. So I just want to say, in this one case, I think the writer and the works have something in common. And tell me if you agree. Agree? Yeah.
Oh. I'm so humbled, Juliet. This is a really special moment to be spending with my editor. I think that my hope is that you'll get a little bit of an insight into sort of how these books are made, and they're not just made by one person alone. You know, it's like you asking me to push further about somebody's feelings. You asking me to fill in the details of movement when all I have are lines of dialogue in my head. You know, it's a real collaboration, and also a collaboration with the readers.
I love the way you put that because I think this is a very collaborative world, but I will also say that your choice to listen to your readers, your choice to listen to the feedback of an editor, that's about you. That's about how you are so, I'll file that under compassion. You know, the fact that you come into everything with such an open heart and so much empathy, and it takes over in the narrative, and you're empathetic about the notes I give you even on the manuscript. So it's why you're such a joy to work with.
Empathetic, but there are times I cry. There are times I think it's hard. It's, you know, it's like, oh, can't I be done with this?
No. Sorry. So, but I know you're here. You're here for Sujata. Sujata, I've saved asking you this question, which I don't know the answer to, because I thought it might be the perfect place for us to start here. I know we've been working together almost a decade, and I don't know this story. Will you tell your adoring fans how you started writing and publishing? What was your path into Rei Shimura?
Oh yeah, gosh. I started to entertain this tiny little wisp of an idea to try writing a mystery novel when I was in my 20s. And at the time, I was was living in Baltimore working as a newspaper reporter, and I was in a book group with a number of other women that worked in the paper, including my good friend Laura Libman. And I was getting married, and I was going to take a leave of absence and go to Japan for 2 years because I was marrying my best friend from college, who was a young Navy officer. And I remember as I was getting ready to go and everyone was saying goodbye, Laura was saying, yeah, I started working on a mystery novel. You know, I'm sure it'll go in a drawer or whatever, but, you know, I'm working on my book. I'm working on my process. And I thought, well, you know what? I don't want her to finish her book before me. So that was kind of a little bit of a kick in the pants for me. And I thought, so when I went to Japan, I realized I didn't have to work in the same way that I did in the United States because, we had a little bit of a stipend from the government, so our housing was paid, and, I didn't have to work a day job. I could do some other kind of job. What was it going to be? And I thought, well, I don't have kids. Maybe, and my husband's going to be away at least 50% of the time. Maybe I'll try writing a book. So that's how I got started. And I looked at what I was in. I was in this wonderful part of Japan. It was about an hour south of Tokyo. And I was living in a Japanese neighborhood. I wanted to make friends with the Japanese women that were left in the house all day when their salaryman husbands went away, and they started telling me their secrets. So that was the start.
I don't know if anyone in the room doesn't already know the Rei Shimura series that Sujata is mentioning, but I would say, speaking of salaryman's wives, a great starting point is The Salaryman's Wife, her debut novel, really excellent story that is set at a hot spring out in the countryside and features, Rei herself has a great antiques background. It's a really, really amazing, it's a really well-crafted mystery,
How
too,
do you
actually.
remember these things, Juliet?
Well, I did some refreshing
and
work before this conversation.
Okay,
Sujata.
so my editor reads backlist that was published in the 1990s that Soho's not going to print. I mean, this is just amazing.
I endeavor to deserve you, Sujata, and I will do that work. So.
That's what editorial love is.
But I also think for everyone in the room who's maybe encountered you more recently, as you've moved toward India with these fantastic books that we're privileged to publish, or with your standalone with Maro, The Sleeping Dictionary, which I hope we'll get to talk about, they may not know about Rei Shimura. And I'm a person who spent time in Japan, and I just, it's instant transportation back. And that's an expensive plane ticket you're saving me. So I think people should know about it.
Yeah.
But okay, so that was 1997 that you published, right?
Yes, that first book was 97. So
tell us, dreamers, how did your first publishing deal come about?
Oh, it was a very nice thing happened. So when I came back to the U.S. with my husband, I'm sad to say my book wasn't done. It was about 60 pages. And so we moved back to Baltimore, and he went into residency training, and I worked for a little while in public relations at our alma mater, Johns Hopkins. And I started taking classes in the night school that were writing workshops with other writers. And it was the first time I had shown any of these chapters. And there were some really supportive people in that group. And then when that class ended, we formed our own group to keep on going. Not everyone in the class, just sort of a select few that enjoyed working together. And so I was working that way on it. And because I was in a group that was demanding, like, oh, everybody's got to send around their manuscript at a certain time, because I had the deadline, it moved me. And with the course, I took a course at Hopkins in the night school, and there was a Sisters in Crime member, no longer, Louise Titchener is her name. She's not here. She's living in Maryland. And she wrote on the blackboard, Sisters in Crime, and she wrote on the blackboard, Malice Domestic, which is a mystery convention that was like 30 miles from my house that happens every year. And so I wound up applying for an unpublished writers contest where all you had to do was send in 5 chapters, and I knew I could polish my chapters to death. And so I was one of the winners of that grant. There were 2 of us that year. And then it was quite easy to get agents to read when you had won something like that. And then it was, within a few months I had an agent, and then it was, I hate to say it, it was actually only 6 weeks from the start of submission to getting an offer. This is a long, the 1990s is a different era, because I've had, 11 months, I've had 18 months, time periods of that where people are looking at things. But and it was a paperback original, and it was a mass market. So there are things that are different about the industry that they'd say, yeah, we'll bring this young woman on for a $4.99 paperback. We're willing to take that risk.
Yeah, I'm sure it's that easy for everybody.
Well, I think maybe bring back more of those $4.99 paperback opportunities, you know, and then more of us can be published.
Well, okay, but this is interesting. We'll talk after. I also want to point out, though, this book is still in print now, almost 30 years later. So we also can testify to the quality of the book. That it's it's an amazing book, and it launched an amazing series. I do want to talk about how things have changed for you since then, over the course of your being a writer. How have your career goals as a writer changed?
Oh, yeah. So back in those days, obviously the first thing was I just want to be in print. I would like to have a life where I'm able to, stay at home and write books and maybe, meet people, meet readers. It was as simple as that. And so in my mind, the way to do that would be to write a book that was different enough that people would be interested in it, and also entertaining and reflect what was different and special about me. Mm-hmm. And I think that sort of is like a blueprint for anybody, is to sort of write very personally, like I didn't try to be someone else. So in those books when I'm a much younger woman, I mean, they're more concerned with they're more concerned with romance, because I'd only been married a couple of years, and so I was sort of like I still was in that 20-something mind frame, and they were still concerned with issues about women's rights. That was emerging. But what I found when I was writing those books that were set in Japan is pretty much the theme of every book I wrote related to history. That whether it was the kimono was old, and that there was some kind of a mystery about what did it mean to have a certain kind of kimono, like for a wife versus a mistress. Or I would be thinking about unexplained World War II history. That would be something else, that things that we don't know or don't talk about in Japan. Mm-hmm. So I was trending more and more to that direction. And so now I think that I really enjoy writing historical mysteries. And I went through a sort of a bridge book called The Sleeping Dictionary, which is a very long historical novel. It's a saga, and it was published by Simon & Schuster in 2012. And I loved writing that book. It actually took me 4 years, just as long as the first Ray Shimura book took, because I was changing places. I needed to learn more about the language. So there were all those things. So I became a slow worker again. And I realized that I loved the world of the past, and I felt like there were a lot of things I could do with it. For example, in the Sleeping Dictionary, I learned that there were women lawyers during, from the turn of the century. So I had printed out an article about Cornelia Sorabji, India's first woman solicitor, and just put it in my folder, Indian Women.
I'm so glad you made that folder.
Yeah.
I'm so glad.
Well, as you know, who was it who had the binders full of women? I think Mitt Romney. I literally do have binders full of women. So I realized that after I wrote that book, I still wanted to be in the mystery world. That's the other thing that was surprising to me. So I wanted to combine the two, and I'm really happy I can do that now. So I feel like I'm satisfying the creative pulse, or the creative, just the push that I have inside, and I'm able to be with people. Like, I'm a very social person, and there's something about writing mystery fiction that makes it easier to meet readers, to meet booksellers. It's a different kind of relationship. And I wanted to have that in my life.
I think your subject matter that you were just discussing probably reinforces that, because I will say we have every book of yours that I've worked on has a structural mystery. It's just an impeccable mystery, and these very compelling characters. All of the classic, like what I want to read about a good book, right? But very, very close second right here are the issues that book clubs want to talk about. You know, all of the isms. You have your colonialism, feminism, racism, classism, especially. I think you mentioned the Sleeping Dictionary examines, I think it starts in the 30s and 40s, and it examines caste. And the main character is actually this caste masquerader who steps into different roles, trying to navigate her way through an incredibly unfair system. And it's really interesting, all these different roles she takes on to illustrate historical India during this period where the British Raj is maybe on its way out. And of course, with Perveen Mystery, we're going back into the 20s. It's such a fascinating period, rich with revolution. In the background, we have Gandhi really taking off, and we have riots in the streets. Like in the Bombay Prince in book 3, we get to see the impact of that, you know, the zeitgeist for freedom, for independence. And we also get to see that historical feminism and how it bears out in these very elegantly researched books. But I think, like, so Gigi Pantian actually wrote this really nice piece in the program that maybe everyone has read about biculturalism and how your characters will attack that. I do think that your issue, the way you frame issues, is part of what makes people want to keep talking about your books for a long time after they're published. It's, I do want to ask you where you're going next with that, but I actually have a lot of ground still to cover here. So. Yes, research. Let's talk about research a little bit. So we have Perveen Mystery, the heroine of the Bombay Mysteries set in the 20s. She is, as you mentioned, inspired by Cornelia Sorabji, the actual female solicitor who broke a lot of barriers in India a generation earlier. I'm curious about your combination of that indefatigable research that you do and where you fictionalize. Like, how do you make a decision about having one of your real cameos, the people walking through your books, versus where you're going to invent?
Yeah, well, I had read the memoirs of Cornelia Sorabji and also essays she wrote about various topics. And the thing about her was she became a controversial character and was not beloved after a certain point because she supported the British Raj. There were a lot of Parsis that did support it, and she firmly believed that it was in women's interest to have a lot of government protection. So for a while, she worked as a lawyer for the British government, and she would travel to see women who were locked up, and maybe, when I say they were locked up, they were secluded in their houses, and because they were women of means, they were on the government's radar. No radar then, sorry. The government was concerned that perhaps they were in danger, the way they would not have been concerned about an ordinary woman. So she got involved in a lot of cases like that. But because, so I'm telling you that she was problematic. Like, she's problematic for me. Yeah. So that's how I fictionalize my lawyer, who is more open-minded. And in fact, the second woman lawyer in that area, Mitan Tatalam, was super feminist and really also very independence-minded, and wound up being an agent to, she helped pressure her community to pass legislation to modernize the divorce laws so that couples could divorce without having this onerous burden of ridiculous proofs. So I look at things like that, and that's how I come to make my character. I would not want to follow exactly. And so here's another example in my forthcoming book, The Mistress of Bhatia House. That's set around a group of women in Bombay that are trying to start a maternity hospital because there was so much death of babies and also mothers because it was uncontrolled fertility. People were getting married at the age of 10, even in very wealthy houses. So it was just this terrible plight for women. And so the idea was if we have a hospital, it could make things better. At least it would be sanitary. And so one of the the first female obstetrician to practice in a hospital in Mumbai is a Jewish Indian woman called Jerusha Gerard. And there are multiple Jewish communities within India. And I was so taken by her. And I thought, well, should I, make this character Jerusha Gerard? And would that be exciting for people? And then I realized, well, I don't know what her attitude was toward birth control. I don't know how she felt about abortion. I don't know those things. So I'm not going to make it Jerusha Gerard. I'm going to make it Miriam Penker and make a different story for her.
And so, because I don't know the bio of Jerusha Gerard, how closely did you adhere to her bio or her facts?
Oh, well, I was fortunate when I was in India the last time. There is a scholar there who is sort of like the keeper of Jewish history, one of the few for the whole country. And so I did a lot of reading, or talking with her, and she knew that family. She may even be related to that family. Her name is Sifra Lenton, and that was very helpful for me to learn more about her and where she came from, and also just about that community.
Yeah. Which is really cool, and you should all pre-order Mistress of Bhatia House now so you get to read about it as soon as possible on July 11th when the book comes out.
So you don't miss a moment of gossip. You can get it all right away.
I think it's a testimony to the success of this convention that I've heard a number of panels where people are disclosing very heartwarming personal stuff about their family background, and I think that's a neat thing. So thank you, Lucinda, for making that safe space for us. So I'm going to get personal, Sujata.
Oh.
I hope you don't mind. Can you talk about your family and how do they affect your writing? Do they at all come into your writing, and how you've chosen to do what you do?
Yeah, I guess I would say that probably my family of origin is they are the ones that sort of drive more of the ideas in my work. And my father was born in 1936 in a town called Jamshedpur, which is in the state of Bihar, now known as Jharkhand. But in those days, it was all part of a big mass called the Bengal Presidency, and he is ethnically a Bengali and a Bengali Hindu. And so he's told me stories about his childhood, and I know that he would have wanted to be a writer, but he couldn't do it because he was pressured to go into science because of the money. But I have some of the things that I've learned about my family as I began writing and sitting with my father and talking about the stories. And he also helped me with translations because I was trying to learn proverbs, understand what they meant, and things like that. So I had started writing about lawyers, and in my book, The Sleeping Dictionary, a male Bengali lawyer plays a big role. And it turned out that in our family background, there were a lot of Bengali lawyers. And in fact, my father's maternal great-grandfather was the first Indian barrister in the Calcutta High Court. He was a young clerk, and it was a Brahmin family, so they got kind of preferential choices at jobs in the British regime. Somebody liked him in the court and sent him to London to train. And so then he came back. And, not only did he do that, he also was the first president of the Congress Party, the political party. And so but he was not a fierce advocate for Indian independence. He was sort of interested in this idea of collaboration, that the British should be more humane toward the Indians, and the Indians should sort of pull themselves together in a certain way, and that it would be this whole cooperative movement. That was his idea. And of course, that wouldn't have sustained in the end, and, time passed. We're talking about stuff happening in like the 1880s, this period. So I learned a lot, and I think also that attitude of my, this old uncle who, W.C. Banerjee is his name, Womesh Chandra Banerjee, and my maiden name is Banerjee. It's kind of like the situation with the Parsis, that a lot of them did not want independence because they thought that their livelihoods would be threatened.
The crimes that you choose to write about in, as plot structure really interrogate that the liminal space between what's right and what's right for India, what's right for individual people, individual groups. And I think also they really capture the multinational or multi-ethnicism, multi-religious quality of Indian life. We're talking about what is writing about India. That's like saying I write about Europe. I mean, there's so many cultures and people and
thank you for saying that.
Yeah, I know. Perveen she just gives us so much of that. And I think, you have that challenge, especially, can we talk about language just for a second, of how do you deal with that challenge? We're talking about somewhat an Anglophone country, and we're writing in English, but there's so many. Praveen's native language is Gujarati, and the people around her are speaking Hindi or any Marathi,
English.
So what are your choices about writing, for non-Anglophone characters, for Anglophone readers, or how you integrate native languages into the scheme?
That's a good question, because it's really tricky. You don't want to hit people over the head with it. And I think I've learned about this since I started with the books in Japan, and I was also using Japanese. And you don't just want to say Ohayo gozaimasu or namaste. It feels odd. It just kind of calls itself out, because the rest of the dialect that follows is going to be in English. Right. So why are you doing one word here? Why are you doing one word there? So if I'm likely to use a word, I might use a word like an exclamation, because you would almost understand the exclamation given given what follows. For example, are is are, hey. That, and with an exclamation point and somebody's name, you would understand that. And I might use some words for food, but then other times not. I will use the word dal. I think most people know that dal are lentils, and if not, there's a glossary in the back, perhaps.
I love your choices there, because it's a way of. The subtext interrogates the colonialism itself. You give the reader all of this context and let them take it and read Praveen for that.
Yeah, it's definitely a tricky thing, because you don't want to show off that you know a word when you could use something else, but then you don't want to say something that is silly. For example, for me to call a sari, to say she wore a 7-yard cotton wrapped around her in intricate detail, trailing over her shoulder. But I will tell you when people wear saris in different ways, right, because that might signify their religion, and it might signify their region. Yeah.
You all should know how much thought goes into our covers. Sujata does so much research to make sure that the sari depicted matches the character's religious persuasion and class, so that there's no misrepresentation. She's, again,
and the hairstyles.
And the hairstyles,
yeah,
right?
The hairstyles also, and the hats. Mm-hmm. I had fun with men's clothing on the Bombay prints. Yeah. And looking at what would it look like what kind of a hat would a journalist wear in 1922 when he was in the hotel?
Listen, come for the fashion, but stay for the food. So not only is Sujata a great food writer,
that's so sweet,
which is very important to me, as all my authors know, but she's also an excellent cook, and she even put together recipes from the book for the first book we did, Widows of Malabar Hill. I think we still have it on our website somewhere.
Yeah.
That was amazing. So
I have recipes all over my website. So definitely I have them. And the Parsi dishes that Perveen's family eats are a combination of spices from Persia and spices from India. They're super spicy, but they're also super perfumed and complex, and they're just delightful. They're delightful foods. And when I'm writing, I sometimes feel like I got to be eating these foods, right?
When I'm reading your books, I feel like I've got to be eating these foods.
We need more Parsi restaurants in the United States.
I agree. Can we make that happen, please?
Yeah, that's what we need.
So I did, when we talked about what we wanted to talk about on this panel before, you said, well, I'd really like to talk about some of the people who opened doors for me as a writer. So I am going to ask you that question. But another question I'm going to ask you immediately afterward is, I just want, again, Sujata's compassion and advocacy. I think that's what she wants to talk about. She wants to give credit to other people. Sujata has opened the door for so many other writers and is constantly advocating on their behalf. And such a huge part of, I think, many of the amazing changes that we've seen throughout our industry over the last 15 years. So I just wanted to thank you for all the work that you do there.
Juliet.
So I know, okay, I'll give you your chance. Go ahead, talk about the people you want to acknowledge.
You know, when I started writing that first book, which was set in Japan, and I was going to panels at conventions and listening to wise people, editors speaking on stage, somebody from the audience asked the question of the sage editor, you know, which mysteries, what kind of foreign settings are popular for mysteries? And, okay, 1996, right? So the editor said, well, mysteries overseas never sell well. Only Britain, France, maybe Italy. So I was just sitting there, and I think there was another woman, another person who was an Asian American there, and we just kind of looked at each other, and we thought, wow, we've been spending all this time. And so this is a long way of saying that I think I would not, I know the reason that HarperCollins took my first book, which was set in India, or no, it's set in Japan, is because Laura Jo Rowland had written a book called Shinju, which was set in medieval Japan. It was about a samurai solving mysteries. And they'd been really successful with it, so they were willing to give it a try. So I really feel like people like Laura Jo Rowland, who were able to sell the first modern, non-cliched book set in places other than England, France, and Italy, like that was really very important for me.
This sort of came up because, as it happens, we have Laura Jo in common. The first mystery I ever edited was by Laura Jo Rowland, and I didn't know if I was up to the task, but she was very patient with me, and she taught me a lot about the genre.
Yeah,
so.
And then furthermore, let me keep going. So
Please.
I was once I came back from Japan and I was in the United States, I had access to more books than from the base library or the Kinokuniya bookstore in Tokyo. And I came across a mystery series about a Chinese-American woman in Chinatown called Lydia Chen by our S.J. Roseanne. I had no idea who this person was, but I knew that I felt really excited to see that it might be possible to publish a mystery set in a country where a person could be Asian, but it didn't have to be like a samurai. You know, you didn't literally have to be a samurai to be an Asian of value. So that was a very important for me. And I remember I wrote, one of the agents on my list was her agent, who did not take me, but that's okay. Everything worked out well. You know, I guess there's only one SJ, you know. So that was another person that that really was formative in those, trying to feel my way to the future moments.
So I am going to open this up for questions, but before I do you have any advice for aspiring writers in the audience?
Oh, I guess I'll keep it brief, but I liked, what I did was I wrote the book that didn't exist that I wanted to exist. That I wanted to write about a bicultural person in an environment that I was really excited about, and I wanted to share about it in a way that wasn't tied to, that didn't make me feel resentful. That sounds weird, but some of the writing about Japan at the time, I thought it was really full of stereotypes, and it didn't relate to what I lived. So I guess I would say, like, writing your lived experience and also connecting with helpers, like knowing there's a bigger community out there, whether it's a writing group or whether it's an organization like Sisters in Crime or MWA, whether you want to take a course. I think all of those things were helpful for me.
It's great advice. Write the book that you want to see, that you want to read, right? That's a classic. Okay, I will take questions. Shout your question, and then I'll repeat it into the microphone. Yes, sir.
It's obvious that a journalism career would help because you have research and interviewing and all those skills. But I'm wondering, is there any way in which it hinders your transfer of your fiction?
A great question. So the question is, journalism probably helps you be a fiction writer, but are there ways it hinders?
Yes, the biggest way it hinders me is that I was trained to write in a way that did not show my opinion, because I was like a daily, features reporter or just like regular reporting, sometimes even police reporting. So it was hard for me to put any sort of, like, I would write from such a detached point of view that I realized the only way I could manage to put a feeling would be to make my narrator a first person. So that's why the Ray Shimura books are first person, because I was trying to train myself to express feelings, and I couldn't do that. But then when I went to the historical, I wanted to go third person, and by then I had learned, but I always have to be kept on task. You keep me on task.
I do that to everybody.
The feelings aren't.
Any other questions? Yes. The question is, does she have any plans to continue the Ray Shimura series?
Well, I would say that I don't have a plan to continue the series. I would like to explore writing short stories and novellas, and I have to find space in my life and publishing, journey to do it. And I don't have that yet.
She looks nervously at me.
Yeah,
She's like,
I don't
my
have
editor's
that
here.
yet, but it's not that I'm against it. Like, I feel fond of those characters, but right now I think that they're resting together. They're having a nice time resting.
That's awesome. Yes.
If you did go back to Ray Shimura, when you started writing it 30 years ago, you haven't been back in Japan since then?
Since 2006.
So there'd be a lot of change.
Oh, well, I would go to Japan. I would have a wonderful trip back to Japan, and hopefully a lot of my friends are still alive. I don't know. And that's what I would do. And I would, because those books are all about what is going on in Japan at that time. Like, for example, one of the books, Zen Attitude, they had just started cellular phones. And it was just like this radical idea. And you couldn't go that far with them, and they had very limited battery life, but I was just overwhelmed with this miracle of the cellular phone. And so obviously I would be picking up on whatever is new, and the social changes of Japan have been great. Like, now there's so many more women in the workforce. It's not necessarily that salary man's wife world anymore. So I would have to get up to speed.
If you needed a research assistant to travel with you.
Well, also an interpreter, because my Japanese has gotten so rusty.
Oh, I'd brush up for that. We have time for one more question. So, who's the lucky candidate? Oh, yes.
How do you keep, or how do you deal with modern sensibility in your period?
How do you deal with, that is a great one. How do you deal with modern sensibility in your historical fiction?
Yeah, that's tricky, because I can't have, Perveen Mysteries say, you know what, the F are you doing not letting me into this room or something, she cannot do that. So I try to always remember how people did behave in society, but I can try to express that, maybe how her anxiety and her feeling of disappointment might physically manifest for her. And so then you kind of understand what's going on, because even though she can't actually understand that, she doesn't understand that what's bad is the same way that we understand it, because there haven't been these expectations and changes of law. But she can feel these things, and we can feel them with her. And she can also try to use the existing law to get what she can for her female clients, because she can't change the law.
If you want to see Sujata truly, fearlessly tackle an issue that the modern reader and the historical protagonist probably have a very different viewpoint on, and do it with such gorgeous empathy and historical reconstruction that it may help you change, reposition our own conversations about this. The Mistress of Bhatia House comes out July 11th. Let me repeat it for you. Bhatia is Bhatia, so go ahead, you can write it down. It's the 4th Perveen mystery novel, and you should also read the first 3. So, don't miss it. Okay, I have to let you go to your signing now, but thank you so much, Sujata.
Well, this was so much fun. Thank you, everybody.